Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever, wherever you are. I hope this finds you well. I am Shaggy, I am Philolitea, and what a perfect audio backdrop for what I plan to do. This is going to be the first of at least a two-part series, excuse me, on Jacques Derrida. Now, I am as familiar, very likely, with Jacques Derrida as you are. I haven't read any of his work, and I haven't listened to experts speak on him. I fell into knowing about Jacques Derrida because an AI pointed out to me that my personal philosophical approach sounded very much like some of his conclusions. An essay of Jacques Derrida's that I was in that same manner, without asking for or seeking, was suggested, what you're talking about sounds very much like what Jacques Derrida was talking about in the essay Plato's Pharmacy. So I went and I looked for a PDF of Plato's Pharmacy, the essay, and what I found was that it's very old. It's very old, and I found one, but it may be subject to copyright, and so reading it in the manner that I want might be stealing from Jacques Derrida's estate twice. The point is, I found students and other people commenting on that essay from their privileged place of having access to it and saying that it's a commentary on Plato's Phaedrus. Well, I have Plato's Compendium, so I have access to Plato's Phaedrus. In fact, I have two different translations of Plato's Phaedrus, Plato's Compendium, so we could read the whole thing together, twice, stealing from those intellectual estates, twice. Okay, so actually the translator of this work isn't listed on the cover of the book. So what I'm going to do is I'll just put a link to this translation in the comments, or in the description or whatever. And we're just going to begin because, like always, I'm significantly less prepared at this point in the day to do something this intensely creative than I think I am. So I only have 14% battery or something like that. But I'm connected to my external, and it always gets me through these for a lot longer than I think it's going to. So let's do it. Let's get right at it. We're going to read Plato's Phaedrus, and we're going to begin with the translator's opening notes about their introduction about Phaedrus. Quoting now. The Phaedrus, Greek Phaedros, I can read Greek just well enough to read that, written by Plato, is a dialogue between Plato's main protagonist, Socrates, and Phaedrus, an interlocutor in several dialogues. The Phaedrus was presumably composed around 370 BC, around the same time as Plato's Republic and Symposium. I've read the Symposium. I believe it's on the Patreon. It might actually be on the YouTube, but I've read the Symposium before. With those two texts, it is often considered one of Plato's literary high points. Although ostensibly about the topic of love, the discussion in the dialogue revolves around the art of rhetoric and how it should be practiced, and dwells on subjects as diverse as reincarnation and erotic love. Excerpted from Phaedrus on Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. So we're not stealing from anyone, I guess. Now this is the real introduction. From the translator, whose name will be listed in the description, and I'm sorry that I wasn't more prepared, translator. Quoting, the Phaedrus is closely connected with the Symposium and may be regarded either as introducing or following it. The two dialogues together contain the whole philosophy of Plato on the nature of love, which in the Republic and in the later writings of Plato is only introduced playfully or as a figure of speech. I actually want to cut in right here. I don't like it when translators, I don't like it when they translate eros, the god, and the philosophical subject to love, because they're not the same thing in English. They haven't been philosophically or in practical use in so many centuries that I really hate it when they do that. They need to retranslate it back to eros, in the same way that historians are asking that when we talk about the Greek mythology, we stop calling the theoi, the individual theo, the individual theoi, theon, I think is the individual, and the group theoi, stop calling them gods, lowercase g gods, because that's not what that word means. Not in our language, not anymore. So because I'm distracted, I'm going to read that again, and I'm going to read it my way. And thank you, translator, for giving me the opportunity to correct you in my idiosyncratic way, because you're right to do it the way you did do it. He's right to have done it this way. I just don't like it for my reasons. The Phaedrus is closely connected with the Symposium and may be regarded either as introducing or following it. The two dialogues together contain the whole philosophy of Plato on the nature of eros, which in the Republic and in the later writings of Plato is only introduced playfully or as a figure of speech. But in the Phaedrus and Symposium, eros and philosophy join hands, and one is an aspect of the other. The spiritual and emotional part is elevated into the ideal to which in the Symposium mankind are described as looking forward, and which in the Phaedrus, as well as in the Phaedo, they are seeking to recover from a former state of existence. Whether the subject of the dialogue is eros, love, or rhetoric, or the union of the two, or the relation of philosophy to eros and to art in general and to the human soul, will be hereafter considered, and perhaps we may arrive at some conclusion such as the following: that the dialogue is not strictly confined to a single subject, but passes from one to another with the natural freedom of conversation. Analysis, still from the translator. Phaedrus has been spending the morning with Lysias, the celebrated rhetorician, and is going to refresh himself by taking a walk outside the wall, when he is met by Socrates, who professes that he will not leave him until he has delivered up the speech with which Lysias has regaled him, and which he is carrying about in his mind, or more probably in a book hidden under his cloak, and is intending to study as he walks. The imputation is not denied, and the two agree to direct their steps out of the public way along the stream of the Ilissus toward a plane tree which is seen in the distance. There, lying down amidst pleasant sounds and scents, they will read the speech of Lysias. The country is a novelty to Socrates, who never goes out of the town, and hence he is full of admiration for the beauties of nature, which he seems to be drinking in for the first time. This is important just for Plato as creating a character profile for Socrates, that he's staying in character with the character Socrates for future generations who will never have met him. As they are on their way, Phaedrus asks the opinion of Socrates respecting the local tradition of Boreas and Oratia. Socrates, after a satirical allusion to the rationalizers of his day, replies that he has no time for those nice interpretations of mythology, and he pities anyone who has. When you once begin, there is no end of them, and they spring from an uncritical philosophy after all. Quote, "The proper study of mankind is man," end quote, and he is a far more complex and wonderful being than the serpent Typho. Socrates as yet does not know himself, and why should he care to know about unearthly monsters? Engaged in such conversation, they arrive at the plane tree. When they have found a convenient resting place, Phaedrus pulls out the speech and reads. Now, okay, so when my reading starts to get choppy like that, it's because I'm thinking about something and I'm trying to remember it as I'm reading, and I'm also trying to read what I'm reading. And so what I'm thinking about is, so I recently read Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teaching of All Ages for the second time. Now, I've read it once before and I wasn't paying very close attention because I was much younger and knew a lot less. I was a lot less interdisciplinarily educated, and I hadn't read Phaedrus yet. And so now as I'm reading it, and I'm remembering that Manly P. Hall spends a considerable amount of that book explaining how Typhon is important to the Freemasonic tradition and why. And here's why. Because the Middle Ages by the 1200s had basically thrown away Plato, but until 1200, they would have been convinced that this Typhon character that they're describing here is the Satan or the devil. And so this is important in the intellectual history of the Western world when you're talking about Freemasons, because Freemasons are trying to say that philosophy and Christianity aren't religions that run contra to one another, because Christianity is built on a Neoplatonic framework that means that Socrates in some way is Jesus' teacher. And so that's how I'm reading this. You don't have to read it, but as it's going through my mind, that's what I'm thinking about. Continuing, the speech consists of a foolish paradox, which is to the effect that the non-lover ought to be accepted rather than the lover, because he is more rational, more agreeable, more enduring, less suspicious, less hurtful, less boastful, less engrossing, and because there are more of them, and for a great many other reasons, which are equally unmeaning. This is why it's important that you've probably read the Symposium up to this point, because this is taking the contra-argument to the broad argument that Plato allows to be presented in that dialogue. And what seems to have happened from my perspective is that Plato didn't like that people thought that he was endorsing all of the approaches to eros and sexuality, because it's not love, it's sexuality that they're talking about here. So he wrote this book. Continuing. Socrates does not think much of the matter, but then he has only attended to the form, and in that he has detected several repetitions and other marks of haste. And the form here, it's important that you've read The Republic, because he explains the difference in a form and an image constantly throughout that book, and so I'll work to help you. Continuing, he cannot agree with Phaedrus in the extreme value which he sets upon this performance, because he is afraid of doing injustice to Anacreon and Sappho. Sappho's a poet. I'm assuming that Anacreon is probably a poet as well. And his name actually means against Kronos in some way, I think. And other great writers, and is almost inclined to think that he himself, or rather some power residing within him, could make a speech better than that of Lysias on the same theme. We're talking about Socrates. And also different from Lysias's, if he may, Socrates, be allowed the use of a few commonplaces which all speakers much equally employ. Phaedrus is delighted at the prospect of having another speech and promises, maybe I meant Phaedrus and not Socrates. See, this is, complicated for both of us. Phaedrus is delighted at the prospect of having another speech and promises that he will set up a golden statue of Socrates at Delphi if he keeps his word. Some raillery ensues, and at length Socrates, conquered by the threat that he shall never again hear a speech of Lysias unless he fulfills his promise, veils his face and begins. First, invoking the Muses and assuming ironically the person of the non-lover, who is a lover all the same, he will inquire into the nature and power of eros. For this is a necessary preliminary to the other question. How is the non-lover to be distinguished from the lover? In all of us there are two principles, a better and a worse, reason and desire, which are generally at war with one another, and the victory of the rational is called temperance, and the victory of the irrational, intemperance or excess. The latter takes many forms and has many bad names, gluttony, drunkenness, and the like. But of all the irrational desires or excesses, the greatest is that which is led away by desires of a kindred nature to the enjoyment of personal beauty. And this is the master power of eros. Here Socrates fancies that he detects in himself an unusual flow of eloquence, this newly found gift he can only attribute to the inspiration of the place, which appears to be dedicated to the nymphs. Starting again from the philosophical basis which has been laid down, he proceeds to show how many advantages the non-lover has over the lover. The one encourages softness and effeminacy and exclusiveness. He cannot endure any superiority in his beloved. He will train him in luxury. He will keep him out of society. He will deprive him of parents, friends, money, knowledge, and of every other good. The he here is eros, but also the self. That he may not have him all to himself, and also lovers are homosexual. Then again, his ways are not ways of pleasantness. This is important that you know this as we go into this, that erotic love with women was a taboo in Plato's day. That's why the Arthurian romantic literature is so important in the literary tradition, because it gave women an erotic voice for the first time in Western history. Continuing. Then again, his ways are not ways of pleasantness. He is mighty disagreeable, the lover. Crabbed age, this is a quote, and youth cannot live together, end quote. At every hour of the night and day he is intruding upon him. Eros is intruding upon the lover. There is the same old withered face and remainder to match, and he is always repeating, in season or out of season, the praises or dispraises of his beloved. We all know somebody that went through a bad breakup, which are bad enough when he is sober, and published all over the world when he is drunk. At length, his love ceases. He is converted into an enemy, and the spectacle may be seen of the lover running away from the beloved, who pursues him with vain reproaches and demands his reward, which the other refuses to pay. Too late the beloved learns, after all his pains and disagreeables, that, quote, as wolves love lambs, so lovers love their loves, end quote. Here is the end. The other, or non-lover part of the speech had better be understood, for if in the censure of the lover Socrates is broken out in verse, what will he not do in the praise of the non-lover? He has said his say and is preparing to go away. Phaedrus begs him to remain, at any rate, until the heat of noon is past. He would like to have a little more conversation before they go. Socrates, who is risen, recognizes the oracular sign which forbids him to depart until he has done penance. His conscience has been awakened, and like Stesichorus, when he had reviled the lovely Helen, he will sing a palinode for having blasphemed the majesty of love. His palinode takes the form of a myth. Okay. I want to pause here for a moment because this analysis is running long. He's going to tell us the entire story, and that's fine. He's going to spoil the whole story, and you need the whole story so you can just focus on how the dialogue reflects what you now know of the story. So you don't want to fade out as he's telling this story. You don't want to think, oh, spoilers, I need to pay attention. Plato doesn't give good stage direction. That's why the translator is doing this. Okay, so it's important that you understand that this story is not presented as fiction. So when they're doing these things, they're presented as real things that real human beings did. Okay? So this isn't out of the ordinary for a wealthy person to behave in the way these wealthy people are behaving. But this is not how ordinary people behaved. They didn't have the money. You had to spend your day making enough money to eat in order to sleep in the place that provided the food. You understand? If you didn't have enough money to eat, you didn't have enough money for a bed that night. So you were sleeping on the ground outside. Okay? That's how the economy worked back then. If you lived in the city. Now, if you were a farmer, what this book is about how Pagani, the people who live in the country, see a different environment that allows them to be poets in the way that Sappho, who's from Lesbos, which is it's an island, so it's a rural community, and these other rural poets, why they write poetry about nature, and then why specifically, and what they're not going to be talking about, is the aspect, the god form of Eros, as Eros the god is worshipped in the pagan regions of Athens, is not called Eros. He's called Priapus or Priapus. And you might know that word because what he had was about a 15-foot long, massively erect phallus. Yeah. So what we're talking about is a phallocentric erotic cult in the countryside and the rural regions around Athens that's devoted sexually to erotic, homoerotic liaison. Okay? And what we know, and I'm sure you know, about Athens is that their particular body image for that particular kind of liaison was for the bottom to be very petite in the pelvis. And so in the country, that's not the case. So that's what this story is about. And that's why Socrates instantly adapts an ironic position. Because what Socrates isn't going to do is talk about how much he loves big roosters. Continuing on. Socrates begins his tale with a glorification of madness, which he divides into 4 kinds. First, there is the art of divination or prophecy. This, in a vein similar to that pervading the Cratylus and Io, he connects with madness by an etymological explanation, and this is why I'm constantly telling, especially young people and determinedly anti-intellectual people, that etymology is the single most important part of understanding how you use your language, because it arrived at the science of linguistics. I cannot read that Greek word because I don't know all of those letters. I can't tell you how to compare these etymologies because I don't know these words. And I don't have a Greek dictionary downloaded on my Kindle right now. And so he compares these these 4 Greek words that I can't read, and I'm very sorry for that. I don't know why he didn't translate them. And then the quote, "'Tis all one reckoning, save the phrase is a little variations," end quote. Secondly, there is the art of purification by mystery. So let's go back. The first is the art of divination or prophecy. The second is the art of purification by mysteries. Thirdly, poetry or the inspiration of the muses, without which no man can enter their temple. All this shows that madness is one of heaven's blessings and may sometimes be a great deal better than sense. There is also a 4th kind of madness, that of love, or eros, which cannot be explained without inquiring into the nature of the soul. And madness here is how they thought of certain primal deities. We're not going to say gods. So Eros is one of them, but that's who they're talking about. I meant to say Ares, as we say it. He was considered a god of madness, and I'm sure that you're aware of the word panic. Pan was one of his lesser deities, or one of his aspects. You understand? And to be Pan-like, it means to be infected with the madness of Pan. It means to be possessed for a moment by the god or the deity Pan. And so this is why neo-pagans who want to say that Pan is A, not a liar, B, not a trickster god, and C, not a possessing entity or a terrorizing entity are fucking wrong. Because the religion of the ancient world contradicts them. And the lived experience of people in the ancient world, I'm going to take it as true before anybody who lives in a city and decided that because she was able to keep a plant alive in her apartment, she's a fucking pagan witch. And I mean that. All soul, continuing, is immortal, for she is the source of all motion, both in herself and in others. Her form may be described in a figure as a composite nature made up of charioteer and a pair of winged steeds. And this is why it's important that you understand that Kabbalah is what happened when this book right here, several of these books actually were read by people who had also read Torah. Because the Merkabah, the chariot that takes you through the Sephirot stages into the ultimate heaven, yeah, that language was derived from this book. All soul is immortal, for she, soul, is the source of all emotion, and here soul is not nous. Soul is suke, or psyche. Soul is your psyche. In this language. This is pre-Christian, and the Christians got that wrong. All soul, all psyche is immortal, for psyche herself is the source of all motion, both in herself and in others. Because this is how I'm going to keep doing this. We're going to keep reading this sentence until you understand exactly what this sentence means to an ancient person. The theoi, the deities, they were both the concept and the anthropomorphization. Okay, so the goddess Peitho, spelled P-E-I-T-H-O, Peitho, she is both persuasion and the aspect or handmaiden of Aphrodite, who is the persuasion toward whatever. All psyche is immortal, for psyche herself is the source of all motion, both in herself and in others. Her form may be described. Now, if you read the Kabbalistic language, we're going to do this again. If you read Sefer Yetzirah, or if you read, this isn't Kabbalistic, if you read the very early Christian scientific literature, if you read Thomas Aquinas, what you'll find is that the mind of God is all motion, and they got that language from the Greek papyrus that describe atom as the mind that is all motion. And so the Greeks, having already a deity that is that, just means that they and their philosophers and their early religious thinkers had already noticed it, but didn't make that thing their highest god, because the storms of the region around Greece and the water were more important to them, and the horses and the other things that came with them out of the steppe as Indo-Europeans were more important than the realization that the cosmos itself is self-aware. Now imagine that. A lived experience where the realization that the cosmos itself is aware and of you, via you, and your self-awareness is not as important to them as the lived experience of satisfying a deity of thunder. That's what we're talking about here. These are the kind of people we're talking about. This is their psychological and religious profile. Not whatever you've been taught. Not whatever you've been told. Because whatever you've been told didn't read this book. Couldn't comprehend this book. They read Joseph Campbell and then they told you lies. But I am Philaletheia. Philaletheia is derived from the Greek word philalethes, and it does derive from Plato, talking about the people who are even above the philosophers, the seekers after truth. All soul is immortal, for Psyche is the source of all motion, herself in herself and in others. Her form may be described in a figure as a composite nature made up of a charioteer and a pair of winged steeds. Apollo will take on that image when Apollo tries to be the one god of the Greek people. The steeds of the gods are immortal, but ours are one mortal and the other immortal. The immortal soul, Psyche, soars upwards into the heavens, but the mortal drops her plumes and settles upon the earth. You can find reference to this in the moments when the Christian community found this book in the Gospel of Thomas, when Jesus says that it's a marvel of marvels that soul came to be at all, but it would be, he says it's a marvel that soul came to be at all, but it would be a marvel of marvels if soul came to be out of flesh, rather than flesh out of soul. And he does say something similar in the regular Gospels, but I've remembered the Thomas because I like it better. Now, continuing. Now the use of the wing is to rise and carry the downward element into the upper world, there to behold beauty, wisdom, goodness, and the other things of God by which the soul is nourished. On a certain day, Zeus, the Lord of heaven, goes forth in a winged chariot, and an array of gods and demigods and of human souls in their train follows him. So they understood. They understood what the Christians are talking about. 350 years. Plato understood it and was writing about it 350 years before Jesus was born. So Jesus cannot have been an idiosyncratic genius. It's impossible. There are glorious and blessed sights in the interior of heaven, and he who will may freely behold them. There are glorious and blessed sights in the interior of heaven, and he who will may freely behold them. I stood before the throne of God at the highest heaven. I did it when I was 16. Couldn't even have been 16 yet, because my friends were all driving and I hadn't taken my test. And because I wasn't in the house that I took that test in, which means that I had to have been 14. I did it at 14. I know I'm not an idiosyncratic genius. The great vision of all is seen at the feast of the gods when they ascend the heights of the Empyrean, all but Hestia, who is left at home to keep house. The chariots of the gods glide readily upwards and stand upon the outside. And now you need to understand something. I've been reading this book because I've been trying to chase down why in the Middle Ages they were so obsessed with the wild hunt. Well, doesn't that sound kind of like a hunt in the context of a 6th century or 6th millennium BC Indo-European tribe that rides chariots because they're the highest technology war machine and hunting machine of the day? Does to me. Chariots don't do shit for Greeks. Greeks can't ride chariots. Where were the chariots in the Battle of Thermopylae? They're not smashing chariots against one another. That's Scythian bullshit. And the Scythians are Indo-European, and if they're not Indo-European, they're of the same military and warfare tradition of the Indo-Europeans in the 6th millennium BC. Thus saith the archaeology. The great vision of all is seen at the feast of the gods, and all of this is wild hunt stuff. If you're a Witcher fan, and hello, Mr. S, pay attention. This is wild hunt shit. This is where that mythology in Poland came from. The chariots of the gods glide readily upwards and stand upon the outside. The revolution of the spheres carries them round, and they have a vision of the world beyond. But the others labor in vain. For the mortal steed, if he has not been properly trained, keeps them down and sinks them towards the earth. Now, again, remember Athens in your mind. The reason that Athens fell wasn't because they spent too much money feeding their horses. It was because they invested in their navy, and Sparta had people on foot. But that's not the reason that Macedon became important. Alexander the Great became important because of what? The companions who did what? Rode horses. This is not Athenian. Socrates never left Athens. But he's telling us a myth through the voice of Plato, a guy who never left Athens and was educated in Athens, about an older Indo-European people. And you want to know why the alternate history crowd lose their mind over Atlantis? Because Plato's doing it over and over and over and over again. Manly P. Hall makes the argument that in one of these books, might even be this one, that Plato is actually talking the secret society, the secret cult that dates back to the foundation of the Indo-European language. So he and I are making very similar arguments. I don't think it dates back. I think he's just taking the available myths in 350 BC and imagining what and using them in different ways. And they just happen to line up because he's a smart guy with how they used to actually be used. You can do this. This is what fundamentalist Christianity is trying to do. They're trying to get back to the worldview of Jesus himself. This is a thing you're allowed. You're allowed to do this intellectually. You're even allowed to be wildly wrong, like fundamentalist Christians. Continuing on. There is an essence, formless, colorless, intangible, perceived by the mind only, dwelling in the region of true knowledge. I call this the source. The divine mind, in her revolution, enjoys this fair prospect and beholds justice, temperance, and knowledge in their everlasting essence. That divine mind is named Sophia, and in the Gnostic tradition, she will be the first emanation from the source, the true God, the One. And then she will masturbate out the demiurge, who is Yahweh, who is Hasatan, who is the devil. And so that's why they all got hunted down and murdered. Things happen for reasons, folks. Continuing on, the divine mind and her revolution, the Gnostics didn't come up with this on their own, enjoys this fair prospect and beholds justice, temperance, and knowledge, these are goddesses, in their everlasting essence, and they will be aeons in the later Gnostic tradition in the same region. When fulfilled with the sight of them, Sophia returns home, and the charioteer puts up the horses in their stable and gives them ambrosia to eat and nectar to drink. This is the life of the gods. And this is metempsychosis, folks. This is what they're talking about, that your twin natures, your human soul and your everlasting soul, they both return to the source to be fed and then sent back out into the reality again. The human soul tries, continuing, to reach the same heights, but hardly succeeds, and sometimes the head of the charioteer rises above and sometimes sinks below the fair vision, and he is at last obliged, after much contention, to turn away and leave the plane of truth. The plane of truth is what I call the source. It's the one. It's the truest possible reality, but it is necessarily an after death experience. But if the soul, continuing, has followed in the train of her God, Theoi, and once beheld truth, she is preserved from harm, and is carried round in the next revolution of the spheres, and if always following and always seeing the truth, is then forever unharmed. If, however, she drops her wings and falls to the earth, then she takes the form of man, and the soul, which has seen most of the truth, passes into the philosopher or lover, and this is ending on a semicolon, but it's important that you understand that the God or Theo here is a literal star, and that's where Joseph Smith got the idea, is he read this book. That which has seen truth in the second degree into a king or a warrior, the third into a householder or money maker, the fourth into a gymnast, the fifth into the prophet or mystic, the sixth into a poet or imitator, the seventh into a husbandman or craftsman, the eighth into a sophist or demagogue, the ninth into a tyrant. And this is also endemic in the Indo-European language system because the Aryans did the same thing in the Vedas, and that's how caste became a thing that we're still dealing with today in India. All these are states of probation, wherein he who lives righteously is improved and he who lives unrighteously deteriorates. They understood that life was short. Life was short. And you had a predilection toward one thing or another because of the many, many trips you have probably taken through this life. Because they could conceptualize that if the stars take something insane like 64,000 years to go back to their first position as they rotate around, then maybe life could probably be that old too. After death comes the judgment. The bad depart to houses of correction under the earth, the good to places of joy in heaven. When 1,000 years have elapsed, the souls meet together and choose the lives which they will lead for another period of existence. The soul, which 3 times in succession has chosen the life of a philosopher or of a lover who is not without philosophy, receives her wings at the close of the 3rd millennium. That's a 33rd soul in New Age language. And guess where the fuck Guy Ballard got it, y'all? Guess where the fuck he got it? He didn't get it talking to fucking the Count de Saint-Germain. That's probably a fictional person anyway. Guy Ballard got it by reading the Phaedrus. When 1,000 years have elapsed, the souls meet together and choose the lives which they will lead for another period of existence. I'm just realizing now that I have a feeling there's going to be a huge chunk of this that's missing audio because my headphones have been turning on and off as I go. So if that's the case, I'll record it again. When 1,000 years have elapsed, the souls meet together and choose the lives which they will lead for another period of existence. The soul, which 3 times in succession has chosen the life of a philosopher or of a lover who is not without philosophy, receives her wings at the close of the 3rd millennium. The remainder have to complete a cycle of 10,000 years before their wings are restored to them. Each time, there is full liberty of choice. Hey, welcome back to Joseph Smith, anyway. The soul of a man may descend into a beast and return again into the form of a man. Yeah, that's Hinduism. But the form of man will only be taken by the soul which has once seen truth and acquired some conception of the universal. This is the recollection of the knowledge which she attained when in the company of the gods. And men in general recall only with difficulty the things of another world, but the mind of the philosopher has a better remembrance of them. For when he beholds the visible beauty of earth, his enraptured soul passes in thought to those glorious sights of justice and wisdom and temperance and truth, which she once gazed upon in heaven. Then she celebrated holy mysteries and beheld blessed apparitions shining in pure light, herself pure and not as yet entombed in the body, and still, like a bird eager to quit its cage, she flutters and looks upwards and is therefore deemed mad. Such a recollection of past days she receives through sight, the keenest of our senses, because beauty alone of the ideas has any representation on earth. Welcome in, Plotinus. Wisdom is invisible to mortal eyes. But the corrupted nature, blindly excited by this vision of beauty, rushes on to enjoy and would fain wallow like a brute beast in sensual pleasures. Whereas the true mystic, who has seen the many sights of bliss, when he beholds a godlike form or face, is amazed with delight, and if he were not afraid of being thought mad, he would fall down and worship. Then the stiffened wing begins to relax and grow again. Desire, which has been imprisoned, pours over the soul of the lover. The germ of the wing unfolds and stings, and pangs of birth, like the cutting of teeth, are everywhere felt. And here Plato, through Socrates, is making a point that the point of the erotic passion is pregnancy only. Father and mother and goods and laws and proprieties are nothing to him. His beloved is his physician, who can alone cure his pain. And how many times do we hear that in modern love songs? How many times do you hear that? Oh, I thought you'd be the one that would fix my pain. What pain? An apocryphal sacred writer says that the power which thus works in him is by mortals called love, but the immortals call him dove, or the winged one, in order to represent the force of his wings. Such at any rate is his nature. Now the characters of lovers depend upon the god whom they followed in the other world. and they chose their loves in this world accordingly. The followers of Ares are fierce and violent. Those of Zeus seek out some philosophical and imperial nature. The attendants of Here find a royal love, or eros in lowercase, and in like manner the followers of every god seek a love, or eros, who is like their god. And that means their image, their eternal soul. Because you have one too. And to him they communicate the nature which they have received from their eternal soul, in Christian language. The manner in which they take their love is as follows. I told you about the charioteer and his two steeds, the one a noble animal who is guided by word and admonition only, the other an ill-looking villain who will hardly yield to blow or spur. Together all three, who are a figure of the soul, approach the vision of love, because it's important that you understand here right now that he's talking about the mind-body problem 2,300 years before the mind-body problem could be announced to be a problem, because there's no fucking problem. The mind and the body they're in a triune structure with a triune structure. The soul has a triune structure. The mind may have multiple structures, and we know that the body is a very complex organism, and that the mind is a byproduct of the brain. But the soul is not. And the soul isn't a necessary, the way the soul interacts with the mind and the body isn't necessarily human in the same way. And that's why we can know, for instance, that a curious bunny who wants to know about humans is an easy fucking meal in this century. So, like, my mother wanted to know, like, well, why don't monkeys evolve human intelligence? Because they don't fucking need it. They reproduce without it. We needed it in order to reproduce for some reason. And that's what Plato's talking about in this book. It's important. Together, all three, who are a figure of the soul, approach the vision of Eros. And now a fierce conflict begins. The ill-conditioned steed rushes on to enjoy, but the charioteer, who beholds the beloved with awe, falls back in adoration, and forces both the steeds on their haunches. Again, the evil steed rushes forwards and pulls shamelessly. The conflict grows more and more severe, and at last the charioteer, throwing himself backwards, forces the bit out of the clenched teeth of the brute, and pulling harder than ever at the reins, covers his tongue and jaws with blood, and forces him to rest his legs and haunches with pain upon the ground. When this has happened several times, the villain is tamed and humbled, and from that time forward, the soul of the lover follows the beloved in modesty and holy fear. And you know what I'm reading that like. That was cancel culture. And now their bliss is consummated. The same image of love dwells in the breast of either, and if they have self-control, they pass their lives in the greatest happiness which is attainable by man, because you have to understand that feminism begins on the quote from, what's her name? I've got Mary Wollstonecraft in my mind, and that's not it. Simone de Beauvoir. The quote from Simone de Beauvoir that men are merely unintelligent brutes and need to be brought to heel by women. That's where feminism begins. So if you want to tell me that feminism is complex, sure. If you want to tell me that it's varied, sure. If you want to tell me it's diverse, sure. But it begins at Simone de Beauvoir saying that men are brutes that need to be brought to heel because she read Phaedrus. At last they leave the body and proceed on their pilgrim's progress, and those who have once begun can never go back. When the time comes, they receive their wings and fly away, and the lovers have the same wings. Socrates concludes, "These are the blessings of love, and thus have I made my recantation in finer language than before. I did so in order to please Phaedrus. If I said what was wrong at first, please to attribute my error to Lysias, who ought to study philosophy instead of rhetoric, and then he will not mislead his disciple Phaedrus. Phaedrus is afraid that he will lose conceit of Lysias, and that Lysias will be out of conceit with himself and leave off making speeches, for the politicians have been deriding him." And so you understand that the subtext here is that Lysias and Phaedrus are homosexuals and lovers, probably going through a lover's spat. Socrates is of opinion that there is small danger of this, The politicians are themselves the great rhetoricians of the day who desire to attain immortality by the authorship of laws, and therefore there is nothing with which they can reproach Lysias in being a writer, but there may be disgrace in being a bad one. And what is good or bad writing or speaking? While the sun is hot in the sky above us, let us ask that question, since by rational conversation man lives, and not by the indulgence of bodily pleasures. And the grasshoppers who are chirruping around may carry our words to the muses who are their patronesses. For the grasshoppers were human beings themselves in a world before the muses, and when the muses came, they died of hunger for the love of song. And they carry to them in heaven the report of those who honor them on earth. The first rule of good speaking is to know and speak the truth. The first rule of good speaking is to know and speak the truth, so saith Shaggy Philaletea. As a Spartan proverb says, continuing from reading this, true art is truth. Where do you think I got my ideas? Whereas rhetoric is an art of enchantment, which makes things appear good and evil, like and unlike, as the speaker pleases. Its use is not confined, as people commonly suppose, to arguments in the law courts and speeches in the assembly. It is rather a part of the art of disputation, under which are included both the rules of Gorgias and the eristic of Zeno. I'm assuming that eristic is actually like sex rules. But it is not wholly devoid of truth. Superior knowledge enables us to deceive another by the help of resemblances and to escape from such a deception when employed against ourselves. We see, therefore, that even in rhetoric an element of truth is required. You have to tell the truth. If you're going to stand on a what's that called when you're in court? You're going to stand up in court and speak. You stand on the witness stand. You have to tell the truth. You have to tell the truth. And what we realize is that people aren't inclined to tell the truth. Because people aren't inclined toward good speech. Zoroaster and his rules for good speech, good thought, good action. Buddha with his rules for good speech, good thought, good action. Those are linked to a time and a place and a person. And it takes time for those times, those places, and those persons to bleed into civilization. That's what this book is about. Socrates then proposes that they shall use the two speeches as illustrations of the art of rhetoric, first distinguishing between the debatable and undisputable class of subjects. You've heard people say, what was his name? Dave Demishek used to say all the time that everything is debatable, that the statement, well, that's debatable, is itself debatable. In the debatable class, there ought to be a definition of all disputed matters, but there was no such definition in the speech of Lysias, nor is there any order or connection in his words any more than in a nursery rhyme. With this, he compares the regular divisions of the other speech, which was his own and yet not his own, for the local deities must have inspired him. Although only a playful composition, it will be found to embody two principles. First, that of synthesis of the comprehension of parts in a whole. Secondly, analysis, or the resolution of the whole into parts. These are the processes of division and generalization which are so dear to the dialectician, that king of men. They are effected by dialectic and not by rhetoric, of which the remains are but scanty after order and arrangement have been subtracted. There is nothing left but a heap of ologies and other technical terms invented by Paulus, Theodorus, Evenus, Tisius, Gorgias, and others, who have rules for everything, and who teach how to be short or long at pleasure. And you may have heard me talk about the problem with how many logon there are everywhere. Everybody's got their logi. Oh, I'm a this gist or that ologer or whatever. Everybody's got their ideology that they reduce their identity down to. Where do you think I got the idea? Prodicus showed his good sense when he said that there was a better thing than either to be short or long, which was to be of convenient length. Mr. S., I don't like making shorts either. I would much rather make these long forms that you can really sink your teeth in and engage with, and that don't just end out of nowhere. But what I have to make is videos that are convenient to my audience. And right now, Mr. S, I love you dearly. You're the only person engaging in my long form. So I have to think about other people too. So this, in a lot of ways, here that we're at the 50-minute mark, everybody in the future needs to know that this is dedicated to Mr. S. Right now, my most performative Patreon subscriber and fan, I suppose, at this point. Thank you deeply. You made this possible. Ooh, I'm having wild visual hallucinations all of a sudden. Okay. Heightened emotional states can cause weird things to happen in the brain. And yeah, all these words are like popping out and turning blue as I'm trying to look at them. Hard to believe me as I say that. Still, notwithstanding the absurdities of Paulus and others, rhetoric has great power in public assemblies. This power, however, is not given by any technical rules, but is the gift of genius. The real art genius here is a lesser god. It's a sort of it's inspiration. It's a sort of lesser possession. It's like being touched. You know how they used to say that they used to call crazy people touched in the head. Well, that's what they meant. They're like touched by a deity in the brain. This power, however, continuing, is not given by any technical rules, but is the gift of genius. The real art is always being confused by rhetoricians with the preliminaries of the art. Yeah, you know, it's so funny. I was having a conversation with Jim and I just yesterday about how I've been watching interviews with musicians, and what I've noticed is that other professional musicians that have podcasts are beginning to interview much more successful musicians than they. And what I'm noticing is that the lesser successful interviewers are obsessed with the gear and the tech and the settings on the gear and the tech and the instruments themselves, and the musicians are like, it's my hands, man. It's the difference. The rhetorician is the interviewer, is the podcaster. I'm not a rhetorician, but you know, these podcasts and these shorts that are manufactured to be exactly a certain amount of words long, to be exactly read in a particular way. That's the rhetorician that Plato and Socrates are talking about here. That's the shallow intellectual that the philosopher rails against and hates in his heart. Continuing, the perfection of oratory is like the perfection of anything else. Natural power must be aided by art. And I got a compliment. Mr. S, I'm talking to you right now. You talked about how my reading style and my oratory style is one that you really jive with. Well, it's art, buddy. It's practice. Decades of practicing, talking to myself, imagining what it would be like if I finally had an interview show of my own. You see what I'm saying? You've got time. You're only, 20? But the art is not that which is taught in the schools of rhetoric. It is nearer akin to philosophy. Pericles, for instance, who is the most accomplished of all speakers, derived his eloquence not from rhetoric, but from the philosophy of nature, which he learnt from Anaxagoras. I prefer Anaxagoras. True rhetoric is like medicine. Who would say Anaxagoras? Who would talk like that? Anyway, true rhetoric is like medicine, and the rhetorician has to consider the natures of men's souls. When I think of these names, I think about moms having to say the whole fucking thing. And she's not going to go Anaxagoras, you go to your room. She's going to say Anaxagoras. Sorry. True rhetoric is like medicine. I am actually sorry for that one. This is the important part. Because Derrida is going to be talking about Plato's pharmacy. And he's going to introduce the Western world, reintroduce the Western world, and introduce the English mind to the pharmacon. And we're talking about it now. This is the important part of what I want you to know. We're at it. True rhetoric is like medicine. And the rhetorician has to consider the natures of men's souls as the physician considers the natures of their bodies. So when I'm talking now directly to Mr. S instead of to a potential future audience, what I'm telling you is that I have to be talking to people whose minds I know in order to feed you medicine. Otherwise, I'm probably giving you poison. I don't know. I can't know. Just like a pharmaceutical company can't know until the rigorous tests are done. And the EPA not the EPA, whatever it's called, that regulating body has to exist in order to prevent them from killing people with no recourse for the dead. Continuing, such and such persons are to be affected in this way, such and such others in that. Like I'm watching I'm watching Rhett and Link of Good Mythical Morning last night play around with flashing lights to give themselves hallucinatory experiences, which is why I stated out loud that you cannot believe me that those words were popping out in bright blue, because I outright did not believe Rhett saw the things he said he did, because they were too close to what people who actually aren't tripping when they're on a placebo claim to see when they're tripping. So let's start over. True rhetoric is like medicine. Do you know what rhetoric is? That might be important. They'll probably define it in this book. And if not, we'll do that in part 2. True rhetoric is like medicine, and the rhetorician has to consider the natures of men's souls as the physician considers the natures of their bodies. Such and such persons are to be affected in this way, such and such persons in that, and that's why I wanted to start over. I didn't get to my point with Rhett and Link. They had to warn their audience, like, whether you know it or not, you might be epileptic, and this might cause you severe harm, so please don't look at it if it hurts. Continuing from the semicolon. And he, the rhetorician, must know the times and the seasons for saying this or that. Just like a shaman needs to know the times, or a priest needs to know the times to say this and that thing at the ceremonies for the rituals for the gods. This is not an easy task. Can't possibly be. If there be such an art, it's the art of rhetoric. I know that there are some professors of the art who maintain probability to be stronger than truth, but we maintain that probability is engendered by likeness. I'm going to say that again because I did not understand what that meant as I was reading it. I know that there are some professors of the art, that is, some people who claim the art of rhetoric. I was reading this like the 20th century. We know that there are some people who call themselves rhetoricians who maintain probability to be stronger than truth. There we go. We all know tech bros who say that what's more probable is what's true. That's the whole point of Occam's razor and parsimony if you're a stupid person. But we maintain that probability is engendered by likeness of the truth, which can only be attained by the knowledge of it, and that the aim of the good man should not be to please or persuade, Plato, his fellow servants. And so what he's saying here, effectively, is using the earlier homosexual language. Your goal should not be to be a sexual sycophant for the men in your lives, nor should it be for you to persuade other people to be sexual sycophants to the people that you like in your life. And so on some level, Mr. S, what I'm asking you is to not put me on a pedestal, right? And you don't have to encourage other people to. If you do, that's fucking great. But you don't have to tell them why you like me. You don't have to fight my fights for me, is what I'm saying. If they don't like me, they don't like me. And that doesn't mean they don't like you. Rhetoric has a fair beginning in all of this. Enough of the art of speaking. Let us now proceed to consider the true use of writing. There is an old Egyptian tale of Taoth, or Thoth, the inventor of writing, showing his invention to the god Tammuz, or Tammuz, or Tammuz. The Gnostics are going to see that Tammuz, and they're going to see Thomas, the disciple, and they're going to be like, bing, 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 bing. We've got a winner here, folks. Who told him that he would only spoil men's memories and take away their understandings. From this tale, of which Athens will probably make fun, may be gathered the lesson that writing is inferior to speech, for it is like a picture, which can give no answer to a question, and only has a deceitful likeness of a living creature. It has no power of adaptation, but uses the same words for all. It is not a legitimate son of knowledge, but a bastard. And when an attack is made upon this bastard, neither parent nor anyone else is there to defend it. That's what I'm telling you. I'm not a bastard. You don't have to defend me. And he's making the argument that the point that writing, because it's static and never changes, and it's subject to subjective interpretation, is worthless. That the oratory is superior. And so what I'm doing is I'm countering that by doing an oratory exercise from written material in a permanent and static medium like video. So I don't need... This work defends itself by being what it is what I'm saying. You don't have to fight my fights. You don't have to defend me. The husbandman will not seriously incline to sow his seed in such a hotbed or garden of Adonis. Now this is important because this is deeply symbolic language. The husbandman is the consciousness responsible for maintaining the psyche that was given to us by the One. The husband is the consciousness responsible for making sure that the soul develops into its perfect version in life, so that it can return to itself and discorporate. That's what this section is about. The husbandman, like the person who raises animals, will not seriously incline to sow his seed in such a hotbed or garden of Adonis. That means that you won't become obsessed with the beauty of the body. He will rather sow in the natural soil of the human soul, which is depth of earth, and he will anticipate the inner growth of the mind by writing only, if at all, as a remedy against old age. Writing as a remedy against old age. If you look at my Patreon and you go back and you find my journals, what was I saying? I'm going to die homeless, and I can't die homeless without having left a record of at least some of my experience and my thoughts. It's a remedy against dying. Because what is old age? Old age is the loss of your cognitive faculties and the death of the body. The natural process continuing will be far nobler than the natural decay of the body. Bring forth fruit in the minds of others, as well as in his own. My own writing process. The conclusion of the whole matter is just this, that until a man knows the truth and the manner of adapting the truth to the natures of other men, my own journey, he cannot be a good orator. That's why I keep telling you, I can't be good at what I'm doing. Also, that the living is better than the written, word. Yeah. My lived life is better than what I write about it, because I'm going to make what I write about it palatable to people so they'll buy it. That's the inclination. Read my journals. I did not. And they did not. And were not. I should probably finish those now that I've got a keyboard here. I can do that, actually. I might do that when I've got downtime. I have a lot of that, actually. I'm going to start this paragraph over because I don't know where I stopped. The conclusion of the whole matter is just this, that until a man knows the truth and the manner of adapting the truth to the natures of other men, he cannot be a good orator. Also, that the living is better than the written word, and that the principles of justice and truth, when delivered by word of mouth, are the legitimate offspring of a man's own bosom, and their lawful descendants take up their abode in others. What a man can say is what a man knows. Such an orator as he is, who is possessed of them, you and I would fain become. And to all composers in the world, poets, orators, legislators, we hereby announce that if their compositions are based upon these principles, then they are not only poets, orators, legislators, but philosophers. And now you understand why I have nothing good to say about hip-hop. It doesn't reach to a higher ideal, it reaches to the lowest possible. All others are mere flatterers and putters together of words. This is the message which Phaedrus undertakes to carry to Lysias from the local deities, and Socrates himself will carry a similar message to his favorite Isocrates, whose future distinction as a great rhetorician, he prophesies. The heat of the day is past, and after offering up a prayer to Pan and the nymphs, Socrates and Phaedrus depart. Hey, look at that. They had a conversation about gods that possess the body, and then they offer a sacrifice to Pan. That means they were standing at a shrine to Pan. That means they were thinking about Pan while they were talking about madness. There are two principal controversies, which means I know what the fuck I'm talking about, folks. You want to say you want to say that my Dunning-Kruger, right? that my Dunning-Kruger allows me not to talk about this. Well, I fucking know what the fuck I'm talking about. There are two principal controversies which have been raised about the Phaedrus. Now that we've told the story, we're going to comment on it so that you know everything there is to know about it before we read it. And that's important. There are two principal controversies which have been raised about the Phaedrus. Continuing. The first relates to the subject, the second to the date of the dialogue. There seems to be a notion that the work of a great artist like Plato cannot fail in unity, and that the unity of a dialogue requires a single subject. But the conception of unity really applies in a very different degree and ways to different kinds of art. Okay, now, wait a minute. This book is about the triune nature of the soul. The soul is the unity. Why the fuck would it only have a one unifying principle and theme? It would have three themes in motion. It's about the motion of psyche. To a statue, for example, far more than to any kind of literary composition, and to some species of literature far more than any others. Nor does the dialogue... I think I actually skipped part of that sentence by changing the page. Let's try that again. But the conception of unity really applies in very different degrees and ways to different kinds of art. To a statue, for example, far more than to any kind of literary composition, and to some species of literature far more than others. If this guy isn't making an argument that he's making a three-dimensional story because Plato himself was a sculptor, because Socrates himself was a sculptor, I'm gonna be pissed the fuck off. Nor does the dialogue appear to be a style of composition in which the requirement of unity is most stringent. The unity is the soul, folks. Nor should the idea of unity, Nor should the idea of unity derived from one sort of art be hastily transferred to another, unless Socrates is a sculptor. The double titles of several of the Platonic dialogues are a further proof that the severer rule was not observed by Plato. The Republic is divided between the search after justice and the construction of the ideal state, except it's not. It's all about virtue. The whole thing is about virtue, because they're still arguing about virtue when they're arguing about the ideal state, because they say, okay, well, given what we know about virtue, then what would be virtue if our lives, every aspect of our lives were virtuous? He's wrong. The Republic is about virtue. It opens on virtue and it closes on virtue, and every chapter argues about virtue. The Parmenides between the criticism of the Platonic ideals and of the Eleatic, one of being. The Gorgias between the art of speaking and the nature of the good. The Sophists between the distinction of the Sophists and the correlation of ideas. The Theaetetus, the Politicus, and the Philebus also have digressions, which are but remotely connected with the main subject. But that's not how those digressions work. Those digressions are examples of the form. Because Plato was a playwright and a genius, and his master was a sculptor and a genius. Thus, the comparison of Plato's other writings, as well as the reason of the thing, lead us to the conclusion that we must not expect to find one idea pervading a whole work, but one, two, or more, as the invention of the writer may suggest, or his fancy wander. Dead ass wrong. Could not be more wrong about Plato. These are masterworks. The ones that were left unfinished because he was a master. Not because he got bored. It was because it wasn't good enough. Or he couldn't figure out how to make it perfect. Because he's talking about the perfection of the person through their work. And that writing, what is Plato doing? He's writing a book about writing and seeking the perfection of the triune soul through the act of writing about people talking. Don't be stupid. Don't let people that are stupid fill your head full of stupid ideas. That's a fucking stupid. He's brilliant because he can speak Greek and he can translate the Greek to be digestible. But he don't know what the fuck he's reading just because he can speak Greek. This is his Dunning-Kruger speaking. He's fucking wrong. If each dialogue were confined to the development of a single idea, this would appear on the face of the dialogue. Yeah, by where it begins and where it ends. Have you never been in a conversation with a human being? Nor could any controversy be raised as to whether the Phaedrus treated of love or rhetoric. It's treating of the God love and how the God love manifests in us through things like how we approach rhetoric and why we use rhetoric to two homosexuals. But the truth is that Plato subjects himself to no rule of this sort. Yes, he does. Constantly. Master artists have to subject themselves to literary to artistic constraints. They have to. And so somebody working in a literary medium has to subject himself to the constraints. That's what the fucking dialogue is about. The constraint of the medium. And that rhetoric needs to be constrained to the medium of truth. Like every great artist, he gives unity of form to the different and apparently distracting topics which he brings together. They're not different or distracting. They're exemplary. He works freely and is not to be supposed to have arranged every part of the dialogue before he begins to write. This is not true. It's just not true. Why? Why would he not have a memory of something that Socrates talked about as his framework? Who writes without a framework? Why the fuck are you accusing Socrates, or why are you accusing Plato of being a gardener like George R.R. Martin? This book is not 700 pages long. He has the constraint of the available format of reading this to an audience at a party. He fastens or weaves together the frame of his discourses loosely and imperfectly, not loosely or imperfectly, tightly and perfectly. And which is the warp and which is the woof cannot always be determined, because it's not matter, because it's three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. The subjects of the Phaedrus, exclusive of the short introductory passage, this is how you can know that the translator isn't actually trained in Pythagorean mathematics like Plato and Socrates were. The subject of the Phaedrus, exclusive of the short introductory passage about mythology, which is suggested by the local tradition, are first the false or conventional art of rhetoric. This is also why Manly P. Hall was insane by age 27. Secondly, love, or the inspiration of beauty and knowledge, which is described as madness. Thirdly, dialectic, or the art of composition and division. Fourthly, the true rhetoric, which is based upon dialectic and is neither the art of persuasion nor knowledge of the truth alone, but the art of persuasion founded on knowledge of truth and knowledge of character. This is a character examination of Socrates and these two men. The dialogue is about what's happening because there's no stage direction and the narrator isn't speaking through the work. The writer isn't in the book. Fuck, man. The continuous thread which appears and reappears throughout is rhetoric. Because it's what they're talking about. It's a philosopher talking to two rhetoricians who are mad at one another because they used to fuck and now they don't. This is the ground into which the rest of the dialogue is worked, in parts embroidered with fine words which are not in Socrates' manner, as he says, quote, in order to please Phaedrus, end quote. The speech of Lysias, which has thrown Phaedrus into an ecstasy, is adduced as an example of the false rhetoric. Ecstasy is a religious state, folks. The first speech of Socrates, though an improvement, partakes of the same character. His second speech, which is full of that higher element said to have been learned of Anaxagoras by Pericles, and which in the midst of poetry does not forget order, is an illustration of the higher or true rhetoric. This higher rhetoric is based upon dialectic, and dialectic is a sort of inspiration akin to love. Do I need to explain that to you, or did I explain inspiration and love enough that you can understand that dialectic is the back and forth where a student asks a teacher asks a student what they know, and the teacher asks them if what they know isn't totally fucking wrong based on what they already know. And so in that way, Socrates and his daemon and his higher god, as were introduced in the much earlier written apology, which I've recorded twice, explain themselves as his higher self. He's communicating with his higher self. And you can communicate with Socrates' higher self by listening to what he said and paying close attention to what he meant and why he said it in that way to those people. And so the example becomes also the deeper theme of discourse. The true knowledge of things in heaven and earth is based upon enthusiasm or love of the ideas going before us and ever present to us in this world and in another. And the true order of speech or writing proceeds accordingly. Love, again, has 3 degrees. First, of interested love, corresponding to the conventionalities of rhetoric. Secondly, of disinterested or mad love, fixed on objects of sense and answering, perhaps, to poetry. Thirdly, of disinterested love directed toward the unseen, unanswering to dialectic or the science of the ideas. Lastly, the art of rhetoric in the lower sense is found to rest on a knowledge of the natures and characters of men, which Socrates at the commencement of the dialogue has described as his own peculiar study. He's a psychologist, the first and maybe the foremost. Thus, amid discord, a harmony begins to appear. There are many links of connection which are not visible at first sight. At the same time, the Phaedrus, although one of the most beautiful of the Platonic dialogues, is also more irregular than any other. For insight into the world, for sustained irony, for depth of thought, there is no dialogue superior, or perhaps equal to it, which means that it cannot be random. It is a masterpiece. Nevertheless, the form of the work has tended to obscure some of Plato's higher aims. No, it hasn't. The form of the work is what the fucking book is about. It's about the world of forms and how we interact with them. The form is going to be counter-formulaic. He's establishing the formula. The first speech is composed in that balanced style in which the wise love to talk. The characteristics of rhetoric are insipidity, mannerism, and monotonous parallelism of clauses. There is more rhythm than reason. The creative power of imagination is wanting. Go fuck yourself, translator. Thank you for making this. 'Tis Greece, but live in Greece no more, is how he ends on that quote. And then he actually does continue, and I'm starting to get annoyed with him, so I may be done reading him. I want to read Plato. Okay, he had way too much to say. There's even an essay on the decline of Greek literature in his introduction to the Phaedrus. So we're going to skip to the end of that because, Jesus Christ, dude, you got way self-indulgent. Thank you for the translation, and thank you for the groundwork, but fuck, bro. I don't know who he thought was going to read this, but I'm pretty sure I got it for free on Amazon, which means it's probably from like the 1890s. And if I didn't get it for free, fuck, dude, what I didn't buy it for was your words. So, okay, that's an hour and 17. We're at the Phaedrus. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break. I'm going to have a smoke. I'm going to check the time. It is still raining balls, as you can hear, so I can't leave. I have about 27% battery, which means I've actually made 15%, so I made profit, so I might actually be able to record the entire Phaedrus. So that ends part one. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself. I actually really do appreciate you. If you want to continue to support more work like this, and there are works that there are questions that you have, you can ask them to me with as much as a $10 subscription to my Patreon. Thank you very much. My tip jar is always open. If you enjoyed this on any level, please, even a $1 tip, it makes me feel so good. It makes me feel like I've done something important, and it encourages me to continue. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. S. Thank you for everything that you've done. You'll see me very soon. I am Shaggy. I am Philaletheia. That means lover of truth. Have a good day. Could be your last chance.